Hi, thanks for tuning in for another craft video from the Hornell Area Family YMCA's Virtual Y. I'm Rebecca Weaver-Hum, and today we are going to make a hooded bath towel. When I was expecting my first child, I saw these really great bath towels with hoods attached for kids, and they looked like different animals and they had great colors, and I thought they were adorable, but I didn't really like the quality of the towel in a lot of cases. They were really thin, or they were that weird kind of microfiber texture that I just personally don't care for. So I thought, well, maybe I can do this. And here's what I have come around to doing. I've made them for my own kids, and I've made them for lots more kids ever since, and it's really, really easy. All I use is a bath towel and a washcloth. There are people who make these with hand towels instead of a washcloth for the hood. I find that a washcloth is big enough, it almost fits on my pumpkin head as well. And it's really straightforward to put them together so that when you're done and you get it unfolded, you have two long sides and an attached hood to wrap up in after a nice bath. The first step in the project is to shape the hooded part of the towel. So I'm using a washcloth for this. I'm not pre-washing the towel or the washcloth because they came from the same brand, they're the same color. Hopefully all will work out in this way. They can just be laundered together as a finished product. But my first step is to decide how I want this to look when it's done. If the washcloth has a dobby border along here, then I typically will orient the hood so that that will show and be, when it's all folded together and makes its hood, then you'll see that little decorative part across the top of the hood. And if there's one on the other side down here, then you'll see that on the back of the towel. A lot of modern towels now don't do that. They just have that little decorative border on one end. So that makes it really easy to make it look like it was a well thought out piece. But for this particular set, I'm using these stripy towels that don't have that. So I'm actually turning it 90 degrees this time. This is going to be the side hem here, and that's where I'm going to attach it to the towel itself. And then the other side hem will become the edge of the hood, and these, what would have been the top and the bottom, are now going to basically be the side framing of the hood. I cut off the tag because I just don't need it. And then it's really very simple and straightforward to put this together. The first step is to fold it into shape. I basically am going to want a shape that looks a lot like this so that when it's sewn onto the towel down here, it makes a little hood. But in order to do that and not have these folds really showing up looking a little bit weird on the outside, I'm going to fold them on the inside first and then fold the top down. So it's a little bit tricky trying to do this with, two hands instead of 4 or 5, but once you get it into place and fix the corners, it goes pretty smoothly. And then it's just a matter of making sure that everything is even and symmetrical. You can totally mark this out ahead of time if you want to, but I find it's actually pretty easy just to fold it all into place and check your folds and make sure that it's even. And the striped pattern also really helps me gauge where it goes. Then my next step is going to be to pin or fasten this in place. This is a great time if you have clips instead of pins to use them, because you can basically just put a couple of clips in here and be good. Working through all this thickness of terry cloth gets a little bit entertaining after a while. And then when I go to sew it, I just want to make sure that all my edges are nice and neat. And that's another place where those clips really come in handy. But if you don't have the clips, totally fine. So I'll do that on both sides. And again, checking as I go to make sure that all the edges end up lined up neatly. And then before I sew it, my last check is going to be to make sure that everything is perfectly symmetrical. So after I put that pin into place, then I just lay it out, and I can see I've got that stripe right in the middle that looks pretty even. These look pretty even. When I go to sew these, I'm just going to make absolutely sure that I keep the edges held together. It gets a little tricky sometimes when there's this much bulk here, and if it's really giving you grief, you can always unstitch that a little bit, and then it'll be a little bit easier to manage. But that's all there is to it. So the next step is going to be to sew this together, and that's simply a matter of starting here and going across, and then I usually sew up the hood a little bit, and that is what makes this not turn into a little pocket. So it'll sew it closed on that side, and then I do the same on the other side. I sew from the edge to the center, and then the center up. And I don't go all the way up to the peak of the hood. I generally stop a little bit short of that. The most important thing, of course, is don't catch the back side of the hood in your seam, and life will be good, and you'll have the little hood part. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch that into place, and then I'll show you how to put it together. Now that the little hood is sewn, we can see a little bit better the construction of it. It does have an opening on each side, and normally I just leave that alone. I think given the thickness of this towel, washcloth, with the stripes, I'm probably going to go through and just hand sew a little attachment point kind of in the middle, just so it doesn't gape open too much. And fortunately, it doesn't look too pointy on top, which I think is, it always looks a little goofy if you've got a really pointy hat. So that won't be the case now. So our next task is simply to sew this onto the body of the towel. And I just do it pretty simply. I take the towel, open it up, and figure out where the tag is. So in this case, I've got a tag over on this side here. So I'm probably going to leave that tag as the bottom of my towel. So since that's the case, so oh, that wants to come right off. Okay. So since that's the case, I'm going to turn it over the other way. Now, this is pretty wide for a little kid as is. So the last thing I do before sewing the hood on is I make a pleat in the towel itself. And the first step to that is finding the center, which since this is folded up, might well be marked by a fold, and marking that with a pin. And then after I found the center of the whole thing, I'm simply going to fold each side over to the middle so that I create a pleat on either side. You can do this one of two ways. You can either fold it over this way on itself and pin it, and again, this is a great time if you happen to have some sewing clips to use those. So I can fold it that way, or I can fold it back on itself this way. I'll flip it over and show you what the two different versions will look like. And then you can get an idea of how you might want to do it. So now when I fold it over, flip it over, and have it in place like this, you can see that on the one side, I have a pleat that starts in the middle and tucks under, and on the other side I have a pleat to the side. I actually like it better this way, with my points coming together like this. So now on the back of the towel, once the whole thing is shaken into place and the hood is attached, you'll have this pleat that kind of opens up from the outside and it folds up like this. And then on the inside, it'll have this wide section right down the middle of little kiddo's back. So I think that looks a lot neater overall, and that's going to be the way that I'll construct it. Again, I will just make sure that these are the same width on either side of my center line, which clearly they're not. And then the last step is to take my hood. I often, but don't always, sew this seam in place just for a little extra strength, and I'm probably going to do that today because these are really, really thick towels. So I'll just sew through the edge of the towel here, and then I'm going to put my hood on, right sides together, pin it in place, and sew it from end to end. And then when it's done, it'll look like that from the back. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then I will show you the result. So that's all there is to it. I've gone ahead and sewn this into place. You see I have this really nice little inverse pleat in the back. The seam looks pretty good from the outside. I haven't missed any spots with the thickness of these edges, which I wasn't sure the machine was really going to enjoy. And on the inside, you just have these folded and finished edges on the inside. So now you can imagine wrapping up a little guy or girl in this hooded towel. So that's all there is to the project. Thanks so much for tuning in for another craft video from the Hornell Area Family YMCA's Virtual Y.